The dust never settled at Forward Operating Base Atlas. It hung in the air like a living thing, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that tasted like metal and regret. The Afghan sun had already climbed high enough to turn the plywood buildings into ovens, and the day had barely begun. Sarah Vance stepped out of the supply depot carrying a clipboard and a box of requisition forms that nobody would read. She wore standard army fatigues with no rank insignia visible, sleeves rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms marked with old scars that looked like they had stories she'd never tell. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her eyes, pale gray like winter sky, moved across the compound with the kind of awareness most soldiers never developed. To anyone watching, she was just another logistics worker, someone who counted crates and tracked serial numbers, someone forgettable. A group of young rangers jogged past, their boots pounding the packed earth in rhythm. One of them, a private with a fresh haircut and newer gear, nudged his buddy and jerked his chin toward Sarah. "That's the supply lady," he muttered. "Been here 2 weeks. Keeps to herself." His companion, barely older but carrying himself like he'd seen more, shrugged. "Probably some admin transfer. They're always rotating people through. She doesn't even look like she belongs out here," the first one said, grinning. "My sister could probably bench press more than her." They laughed and kept running, their voices fading into the general noise of the base generators humming, trucks idling, the distant thump of rotor blades as a Chinook lifted off from the landing zone. Sarah heard them. She always heard them. But her expression didn't change. She just adjusted the box in her arms and kept walking toward the operations building, her boots finding their path with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of moving through war zones. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Inside the operations center, Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres was trying to make sense of a maintenance report when Sarah walked in. He looked up, recognized her, and offered a tired smile. "Morning, Vance. Got those supply manifests?" She set the box down on his desk with practiced care. "Everything you asked for. The ammunition requisition needs a secondary signature from Major Reeves, but the rest is good to go." Torres nodded, already shuffling through the papers. "You're efficient. I'll give you that. Most of the logistics people we get out here can't find their own ass with both hands and a map." "I try to keep things organized," Sarah said quietly. There was something in the way she said it, calm, measured, almost distant, that made Torres pause. He'd been deployed 7 times over 12 years, and he'd learned to read people the way some people read books. This woman standing in front of him had the kind of stillness that only came from 2 places: meditation retreats or combat. And Forward Operating Base Atlas was a long way from any meditation retreat. "You served before this?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Sarah's eyes flicked to him for just a moment, then back to the paperwork. "Few years ago. Different life." She didn't elaborate. Torres didn't push. In a war zone, everyone had ghosts they didn't want to talk about. "Well, we're glad to have someone who knows what they're doing," he said, signing off on the last form. "Half the base would fall apart without decent supply management. Just doing my job, Sergeant." As she turned to leave, Torres noticed something. When she moved, there was no wasted motion. Every step was deliberate, balanced, efficient. Her head turned to check corners before she reached them. Her right hand stayed loose at her side, positioned where a sidearm would rest if she wore one. Old habits. Combat habits. He watched her disappear through the door and made a mental note to check her personnel file when he had time. Something about Sarah Vance didn't add up, but in a war zone, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Outside, the base continued its daily rhythm. Soldiers moved between buildings, conducting the endless maintenance and preparation that filled the hours between missions. The Afghan mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks sharp and unforgiving against the bright sky. Sarah walked past the motor pool where mechanics were working on a Humvee with a blown transmission. One of them, a corporal with grease-stained hands, called out to her, "Hey, supply, we're still waiting on those engine parts." Any idea when they're coming in? She stopped, consulted her clipboard without hesitation. Should be on the next convoy. 48 hours. Maybe less if the route stays clear. You sure about that? Last logistics coordinator told us 3 days. Then it turned into a week. I'm sure, Sarah said. Her voice carried quiet certainty. I tracked the shipment myself. It's at Bagram now. Convoy leaves at 0600 tomorrow. The corporal studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Thanks. As she walked away, he turned to his partner. She actually knows what she's talking about. That's new. What none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed, was that Sarah Vance had spent 3 years as one of the most lethal snipers the 75th Ranger Regiment had ever produced. That her hands had once held a custom-built rifle that could put a bullet through a target's eye from over a mile away. That she'd operated in places so classified their names never appeared on any map. They didn't know about the 147 confirmed kills in her service record, filed away in a classified folder that only a handful of officers had clearance to read. They didn't know about the mission in Kandahar, where she'd held a defensive position for 11 hours straight, eliminating 17 Taliban fighters who'd been trying to overrun a trapped Special Forces team. They didn't know about her call sign, Raven 6. And they especially didn't know about Corporal Jenna Martinez J., the best spotter in the regiment, who died on a rooftop in Helmand Province taking a bullet meant for Sarah. Jay had seen the shooter first, had shoved Sarah aside, and had paid for that split-second decision with her life. Sarah had held her as she died, her hands slick with blood, Jay's voice getting weaker with each word. Not your fault, Sar. You finish. The mission. The mission. Always the mission. Sarah had finished it. She'd picked up her rifle, found the shooter, and eliminated him with one shot through a gap in the brickwork, no bigger than a fist. Then she'd eliminated his 6 companions for good measure. Then she'd called in the extraction and carried Jay's body down 4 flights of stairs to the landing zone. After that, she'd turned in her rifle, accepted her discharge papers, and walked away from war, or tried to. But the thing about war is that it never really lets you go. It follows you. It waits. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it comes calling again. Sarah reached the small containerized housing unit that served as her quarters. It was barely bigger than a closet, a cot, a footlocker, a small desk. She'd kept it sparse, almost monastic. No photos, no decorations. Just the essentials. She sat down on the edge of the cot and pulled off her boots. Her hands were steady, but inside, the old weight pressed against her chest. The weight that never quite went away, no matter how many supply manifests she filled out or how many requisition forms she filed. On her right forearm, partially hidden by her rolled sleeve, was a tattoo. Most people never noticed it, or if they did, they assumed it was just decoration, but it wasn't. It was a raven in flight, wings spread wide, and beneath it, coordinates 34.5553 degrees north, 69.207, 5 degrees east, Helmand Province. The rooftop, the place where Jay had died. Sarah traced her finger along the coordinates, a ritual she performed every morning and every night. A reminder. A promise. Still here, Jay, she whispered. Still trying to figure out what comes next. Outside, the base loudspeaker crackled to life with routine announcements. Another day at Forward Operating Base Atlas. Another day of pretending to be someone she wasn't. But deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains, 40 miles from the base, something was happening that would change everything. A ranger patrol was walking into an ambush, and before the day was over, Sarah Vance would have to decide whether to stay buried in supply logistics or become Raven 6 one more time. The morning briefing took place in the operations center at 0800 hours sharp. Sarah normally avoided these meetings. They were for combat personnel and command staff, not logistics workers. But Major Reeves had specifically requested her presence to discuss supply chain issues affecting the upcoming operations. She entered the room quietly and took a position near the back wall, clipboard in hand, trying to be invisible. The room was already full of officers and senior NCOs, their voices mixing in that particular pitch of military confidence that came before missions. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks stood at the front near the tactical map, his posture rigid with the kind of authority that didn't need to be earned, it could simply be worn. He was in his mid-40s. Combat patch on his right shoulder, Ranger tab, airborne wings. Everything about him screamed career soldier. He was also the kind of officer who believed women belonged in support roles, not trigger-pulling positions. He'd never said it directly, that would be a career ender in the modern army, but everyone knew. It was in the way he assigned missions, the way he spoke to female soldiers, the way his jaw tightened whenever gender integration policies were mentioned. Major Reeves, a weather-beaten officer with kind eyes and 3 deployments under his belt, noticed Sarah enter and gave her a subtle nod. He was one of the few people on base who treated her like an actual professional instead of just another clerk. "All right, let's get started," Hendricks said, his voice cutting through the conversation. "We've got a high-value target operating in Sector 7. Intelligence suggests he's coordinating weapons shipments from Pakistan. We're sending a reinforced platoon to establish overwatch positions and gather intelligence." He pointed to the map, indicating a series of valleys in the rugged terrain north of the base. "The geology is challenging. Limited lines of sight, multiple egress routes for hostiles. We'll have air support on standby, but weather's supposed to deteriorate this afternoon." One of the captains raised his hand. "Sir, do we have sniper support for the operation?" Hendricks shook his head. "Our designated marksmen are already deployed with Alpha Company. We'll have to make do with standard infantry overwatch." There was a murmur of concern. Everyone in the room knew that making do in complex terrain could mean the difference between a successful operation and a disaster. Sarah shifted her weight slightly, her eyes on the map. From where she stood, she could see the problem immediately. The proposed overwatch positions didn't cover the southern approach, a ridgeline that ran parallel to the valley floor. Any competent insurgent force would use that high ground to set up ambush positions. "Sir," Major Reeves spoke up, "I'm concerned about the southern ridge. If hostiles establish positions there, our people will be exposed." Hendricks frowned, studying the map. "Point taken. But without dedicated sniper assets, we can't cover every angle. The team will have to maintain tactical awareness and be ready to reposition if needed." Sarah knew she should keep her mouth shut. She was here to discuss supply issues, not tactical planning. But old instincts died hard, and she could see men being put at risk because of inadequate fire support planning. "The southern ridge overlooks the entire valley," she said quietly. "Elevation advantage is approximately 200 meters. If hostile forces establish a position there, they'll have clear fields of fire on all primary and secondary routes." The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. Hendricks' eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Sarah Vance, sir. Supply logistics." The lieutenant colonel's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Supply logistics. And you're offering tactical advice on infantry operations?" "No, sir. Just making an observation about the terrain." "An observation?" Hendricks crossed his arms. "Tell me, Specialist Vance." "I'm not enlisted, sir. Civilian contractor." That made it worse. Sarah could see it in his face, the immediate dismissal, the contempt. A civilian, a woman, offering input on military operations. In Hendricks' worldview, those were 3 strikes. "Well, Ms. Vance," he said, putting mocking emphasis on the civilian title, "I appreciate your concern. But I think the Rangers can handle their own tactical planning without input from the supply depot." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. Sarah's expression didn't change, but inside, something old and sharp began to stir. Pride. The kind that came from knowing things these men had never learned. "Of course, sir," she said evenly. "My apologies for overstepping." Hendricks turned back to the map, dismissing her entirely. "Now, as I was saying, the timeline for insertion is—" "May I ask a question, sir?" Sarah's voice remained calm, professional. Hendricks turned slowly, his patience clearly wearing thin. "What?" The overwatch positions you've marked. What's the effective range you're planning for? Standard engagement range. 300 to 500 meters. And if the target presents at 800 meters? Or 1,000? Then the team adjusts position or calls in air support. Which takes time, Sarah said. And in that time, if hostiles have established positions on that southern ridge, your team will be taking accurate fire from elevated positions while trying to maneuver under pressure. The room had gone completely silent now. Major Reeves was watching Sarah with sudden interest, his eyes sharp. A few of the other officers exchanged glances. Hendrick's face flushed slightly. Miss Vance, your job is to ensure we have ammunition and supplies. My job is to plan combat operations. I've been doing this for 20 years. I think I know a bit more about infantry tactics than someone who spends her days counting crates. Yes, sir. Sarah's voice remained neutral, but something in her eyes had changed. A hardness that hadn't been there before. In fact, Hendricks continued, I'm curious why you're even in this briefing. Major Reeves? Reeves cleared his throat. I asked her to attend, sir. She's been tracking our ammunition expenditure rates, and I wanted her input on supply requirements for the operation. Well, she can provide that input on supply requirements. Not tactical planning. Hendricks looked back at Sarah. Unless you have some secret military background you'd like to share? The question hung in the air. Sarah could have answered it, could have told him exactly what her background was, but she'd learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. No, sir. Just trying to be helpful. Helpful would be making sure my Rangers have the gear they need when they need it. Not playing armchair general. Understood, sir. Hendricks turned away again, and Sarah took that as her dismissal. She slipped out of the room quietly, her boots barely making sound on the concrete floor. In the hallway outside, she leaned against the wall and took a slow breath. Her hands were shaking not from fear or nervousness, but from the effort of keeping everything locked down. The old anger. The old pride. The old knowledge that she could read terrain better than most of the men in that room combined. That was interesting. She looked up to find Major Reeves standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. I apologize, sir. I shouldn't have spoken up. No, you probably should have. Reeves walked over to her, lowering his voice. That southern ridge is a problem. Hendricks sees it. But he's too stubborn to acknowledge it. Especially after you pointed it out. It's not my place. Maybe. Reeves studied her face for a long moment. You know, I did a routine background check when you first arrived. Standard procedure for all contractors. Your file is surprisingly thin. Previous employment listed as government service. No details. Security clearance is active but classified level not specified. References from 2 generals and a colonel, all of whom refused to provide details beyond highly recommended. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I filed paperwork in some boring offices, sir. That's all. Uh-huh. Reeves didn't look convinced. Paperwork specialists don't usually read terrain like a graduate of Ranger School. They also don't usually carry themselves like someone who spent time in very bad places doing very difficult things. I really need to get back to work, sir. I bet you do. Reeves stepped aside to let her pass. But Vance, when this operation goes sideways, and I have a bad feeling it might, I hope you'll remember that some of us actually listen. Sarah nodded once and walked away, her mind already turning over the tactical problem she'd identified. She'd learned to trust her instincts over the years. They'd kept her alive through 3 deployments and countless firefights. And right now, those instincts were screaming that Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks was about to get Rangers killed. The rest of the morning passed in uncomfortable routine. Sarah worked through supply requisitions, updated inventory logs, and coordinated with the convoy schedule for incoming shipments. Surface-level work that occupied her hands but not her mind. Her mind kept returning to that map. The southern ridge. The exposed approach routes. The overconfident assumption that tactical awareness would be enough to compensate for inadequate fire support. She'd seen that kind of thinking before. Hell, she'd been deployed specifically to fix exactly these kinds of problems. Back when she wore a uniform and carried a rifle that cost more than most cars. Around 1,100 hours. She was in the supply depot, inventorying medical supplies, when she heard boots approaching. She looked up to find Staff Sergeant Torres standing in the doorway with another soldier she didn't recognize. A sergeant first class with ranger scroll, combat patch, and the weathered look of someone who'd seen more than his share of action. "Vance, got a minute?" Torres asked. "Of course." The other soldier stepped forward, extending his hand. "Sergeant First Class David Chen. I'm the senior NCO for the platoon heading out this afternoon." Sarah shook his hand, noting the grip firm, controlled, exactly what you'd expect from an experienced ranger. "Sarah Vance. What can I do for you, Sergeant?" "Torres mentioned you had some concerns about our operation." Sarah shot a glance at Torres, who shrugged unapologetically. Chen caught the look and smiled slightly. "It's all right. Hendricks can be stubborn, but I'm responsible for bringing my men home, so I'll take tactical advice from anyone who might help me do that." "Torres says you spotted a problem with our Overwatch plan." Sarah hesitated. This was dangerous territory. But Chen had come to her, and he'd done it with the kind of humility that only came from real combat experience. "The southern ridge," she said finally. "It provides elevated positions with clear lines of sight into the valley. If hostile forces establish positions there, they'll have significant tactical advantage over your team." Chen nodded slowly. "I flagged the same thing with Hendricks. He's convinced the enemy won't have time to set up there before we establish presence in the valley." "That's optimistic. That's one word for it." Chen pulled out a folded map from his cargo pocket and spread it on the supply crate between them. "Show me what you see." Sarah studied the map, her finger tracing terrain features with the kind of familiarity that comes from hundreds of hours studying topography. "Primary concern is here elevation 2,240 meters. It's approximately 800 to 1,000 meters from your planned positions. Anyone with decent marksmanship and a scoped rifle could engage your team with relative impunity. Our designated marksmen can return fire at that range." "Can they?" Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes. "With standard M4 platforms, even with optics, at 800+ meters, against elevated positions with cover? What's the wind reading going to be at that altitude? How are you calculating bullet drop over terrain with 30-degree angle variation?" The questions came out naturally, reflexively. The kind of questions a sniper would ask. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with recognition. "Those are very specific concerns. They're logical concerns. They're sniper concerns," Chen said quietly. "The kind someone asks when they've had to calculate those exact variables in real combat situations." Sarah closed her mouth, realizing she'd revealed more than she'd intended. Torres was watching both of them with interest. Chen folded the map carefully. "I'm not going to ask questions you don't want to answer. But I will say this. If you know something that can help keep my rangers alive, I'd appreciate hearing it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pointed to a different section of the map. "This ridge here. Elevation 2,310. It's higher than the hostile position I'm concerned about. Clear line of sight down into the valley and Overwatch on the southern ridge. If you could establish a position there, you'd have elevation superiority. That's almost 2 kilometers from the primary objective." "Yes, that's extreme range for standard infantry weapons." "Yes, it is." Chen studied her face, then looked back at the map. "But not extreme range for a trained sniper." Sarah didn't respond. "We don't have any snipers assigned to this operation," Chen continued. "Hendricks already confirmed that." "Then I guess you'll have to hope his optimism is justified, Sergeant." Chen folded the map again, his expression thoughtful. "You know, we have a few weapons in the armory that don't get much use. Some long-range precision rifles that our scout snipers used before they rotated home. Equipment just sits there gathering dust because we don't have anyone qualified to use it. That's unfortunate." "It is." Chen turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "If you ever want to see what we have available, just let me know." I'm always interested in professional opinions on equipment readiness. After he left, Torres leaned against the supply crate and whistled softly. Well, that was interesting. I shouldn't have said anything. Probably not. But Chen's a good man. Smart. If he's coming to you for advice, it's because he knows his team is walking into a bad situation. Sarah went back to her inventory checklist, trying to focus on the medical supplies in front of her. But her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, and Torres noticed. You all right? Fine. You know, for someone who claims to have just pushed paperwork, you know a hell of a lot about long-range ballistics and terrain analysis. Sarah set down her pen and looked at him directly. Sergeant Torres, I'm going to say this once. My previous service is classified. I'm not trying to be mysterious or difficult. That's just the reality. What I did before is in a file somewhere that neither you nor I can access. All I can tell you is that I did my job. I did it well, and I left because I needed to. Torres held up his hands. Understood. Not trying to pry. Just. If things go bad out there, and Chen needs help, I hope you'll consider stepping up. I'm not that person anymore. Maybe. But something tells me that person is still in there, whether you want her to be or not. He left her alone with her thoughts and her trembling hands. Sarah tried to go back to work, but her mind wouldn't cooperate. She kept seeing the map, the terrain, the exposed positions. Rangers moving through a kill zone while hostile forces held the high ground. It was Jay's voice she heard next, as clear as if her old spotter were standing right beside her. Sar, you can't save everyone, but you damn well better try to save the ones you can. Sarah closed her eyes and took a slow breath. In the corner of the supply depot, covered in canvas and locked in a metal case that was labeled optical equipment, sat a rifle. Not her rifle, that one was gone, turned in with her discharge papers. But this one was close. An M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, effective range out to 1,200 meters. She hadn't touched it since arriving at the base, hadn't even looked at it, but she knew exactly where it was. Outside, the afternoon heat was building towards something heavy and oppressive. Storm clouds were gathering over the Hindu Kush, the kind of weather that grounded helicopters and turned mountain valleys into isolated pockets where men could die without air support to save them. Lieutenant Colonel Hendrick's platoon would be inserting in 3 hours, and Sarah Vance, who had sworn never to pick up a rifle again, could feel the old weight settling back onto her shoulders, whether she wanted it there or not. The radio crackle started at 1,647 hours. Sarah was updating fuel consumption logs in the supply office when she heard Torres's voice rise sharply in the adjacent communications room. She set down her pen and listened. Say again, Viking 2-1. You're breaking up. Static. Then a voice, strained and urgent. Multiple contacts. Southern Ridge. Taking heavy fire. Sarah's hands stopped moving. Her entire body went still. Viking 2-1. This is base. Confirm your status. More static. Then, we're pinned down. They were waiting for us. At least 30 hostiles, maybe more, established positions on the high ground. We've got 2 wounded. Can't move without getting cut to pieces. It was Chen's voice. She'd only spoken with him once, but she recognized the controlled urgency of a professional soldier dealing with the worst-case scenario. Sarah was moving before she consciously decided to. She walked into the communications room where Torres was bent over the radio console, his face tight with concentration. 2 other operators were trying to establish contact with air support. Where's the rescue? Chen's voice crackled through again. We need immediate air support, or we're not making it out of here. Torres keyed his mic. Viking 2-1. Air support is grounded. Weather's too bad for rotary wing, and the ceiling's too low for fixed-wing strikes. We're working on alternatives. We don't have time for alternatives. They're closing in from 3 sides. Sarah stepped closer, her voice quiet but carrying authority. Let me see the map. Torres glanced at her. then made a split-second decision and pulled up the tactical display on his screen. The GPS trackers showed Chen's platoon as blue icons clustered in the valley exactly where she'd known they'd be vulnerable. And on the southern ridge, thermal imaging was lighting up with hostile signatures, dozens of them. "Jesus," one of the other operators whispered. "They walked right into an ambush." "Not an ambush," Sarah said quietly. "A prepared defensive position. The enemy knew we'd come through that valley. They've probably been set up there for days." Torres looked at her sharply. "You called this?" "In the briefing this morning." "Where's Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks?" "In the command post, coordinating response options." Torres hesitated. "Which are pretty limited right now. Without air support and no ground units close enough to reinforce, those Rangers are on their own." Through the radio, they could hear gunfire in the background of Chen's transmission. Short, controlled bursts from the Rangers, answered by longer volleys from multiple positions. "Viking 2-1, this is base. Can you break contact and move to alternate extraction point?" "Negative, we're completely exposed. Every time someone moves, they get targeted by multiple shooters. They've got the high ground and they're using it." Sarah's jaw tightened. This was exactly what she'd warned about. The southern ridge provided perfect overwatch positions with clear fields of fire into the valley. And without dedicated sniper support, the Rangers had no way to suppress those positions. The door burst open and Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks strode in, his face set in hard lines. "Situation report." Torres stood. "Sir, Viking 2-1 is pinned down in Sector 7. Multiple hostile contacts on elevated positions. At least 30 confirmed. 2 wounded. Unable to maneuver. Air support is grounded due to weather. No reinforcements available within tactical time frame." Hendricks leaned over the display, studying the positions. His face showed no emotion, but Sarah could see his hands clench slightly. He was realizing his mistake, but there was no time for that now. "What are their options?" "Limited, sir. They can try to fight their way out, but casualties will be significant. Or they can hold position and hope the weather clears for air support." "How long until weather window?" "Minimum 2 hours, sir. Possibly longer." Hendricks was quiet for a moment, then keyed the radio himself. "Viking 2-1, this is Atlas Actual. Hold your position. Dig in and maintain defensive perimeter. We'll get you air support as soon as the weather breaks." "Sir, with respect, we might not have 2 hours. They're organizing for a coordinated assault." "Acknowledged, Viking 2-1. Do your best to hold." Atlas Actual out. He released the transmit button and turned to his staff. "Get me every available asset. I want to know if there's any way to get support to those Rangers." Sarah stepped forward. "Sir." Hendricks' eyes locked on her, and she saw recognition followed immediately by irritation. "What are you doing here?" "I can help. Unless you can fly a helicopter through a thunderstorm or teleport a QRF into that valley, I don't see how." "The southern ridge. The position the hostiles are using for overwatch. It's approximately 900 meters from the Ranger position. I'm aware of the tactical situation, Miss Vance. There's a counter position. Higher elevation, 1,100 meters from the hostile position and 1,800 meters from the Rangers. Clear line of sight to both areas." Hendricks stared at her. And if someone could establish a sniper position there, they could suppress the hostile overwatch and give the Rangers room to maneuver. "We don't have any snipers available. I already explained that in the briefing." Sarah took a slow breath. This was the moment. The decision that would either save lives or reveal truths she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. "Yes, you do," she said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone was looking at her now. Hendricks' expression shifted from irritation to confusion. "Excuse me, you have one available sniper, sir." "You're looking at her." For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then, Hendricks laughed a short, harsh sound without humor. "You're joking." "No, sir. You're a supply contractor. A civilian with no combat designation and no military qualification that I'm aware of." Sarah reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out something she hadn't carried in over 2 years. A small leather wallet, worn at the edges. She opened it and held it up so Hendricks could see the ID card inside. Military ID. Active duty status. Name: Sarah J. Vance. Rank: Staff Sergeant. Unit: 75th Ranger Regiment. MOS: 11. B. Infantry. Additional qualification: B. 4. Sniper. The ID was expired, the service dates ending 2 years ago, but the qualifications didn't disappear just because someone left the military. Hendricks took the wallet, studying the ID with narrowed eyes. This says you were a ranger. Yes, sir. Why the hell are you working in supply logistics? Because I left that life, sir. But those rangers in the valley don't have the luxury of my life choices right now. Hendricks looked at Torres. Did you know about this? No, sir. Her personnel file doesn't include military service history, because it's classified, Sarah said. My previous assignments were JSOC operations. The details aren't available through normal channels. JSOC. Hendricks said the word slowly, testing it. Joint Special Operations. Command the people who did the missions that never made it into official reports. He looked at her with new eyes, reassessing. What was your call sign? Sarah hesitated. She hadn't spoken that name in 2 years. Hadn't wanted to. But lives were at stake. Raven 6. Torres drew in a sharp breath. One of the other operators actually stepped back slightly. Hendricks' expression shifted again, this time to something closer to shock. The Raven 6? Helmand Province, 2021? The sniper who held off a Taliban assault for 11 hours? Yes, sir. You were supposed to be a man. People make that assumption a lot, Sarah said flatly. Sir, we're wasting time. Those rangers need help and I can provide it. But I need access to the armory and transport to the counter position immediately. Hendricks still looked stunned, trying to reconcile the quiet supply worker with the legend he'd apparently heard about. But he was also a professional, and professionals made decisions. Torres, get her whatever she needs, full access to the armory. He turned back to Sarah. You understand that if you're lying about your qualifications, those men will die? I understand, sir. But I'm not lying. Then get them out of there, Sergeant Vance. Sarah was already moving toward the door. Torres followed, nearly jogging to keep up with her. Holy shit, he breathed. You're Raven 6. The actual Raven 6. Not anymore. Right now I'm just someone who needs a rifle and a ride. They reached the armory in under a minute. The armorer on duty, a specialist named Harris, looked up in surprise as Sarah strode in with Torres on her heels. I need the M2010, full combat load, and weather gear, Sarah said, her voice clipped and professional. The transformation was remarkable. The quiet supply worker was gone, replaced by someone who spoke with absolute authority. Harris blinked. Ma'am, I can't just... Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks' authorization. We have rangers dying in the field and no time to argue. Get me the rifle. Now. Something in her voice made Harris move immediately. He unlocked the weapons cage and pulled out a long black case. The M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle. 300 Winchester Magnum. Effective range: 1,200 meters. Sarah opened the case and her hands moved over the weapon with the kind of familiarity that can't be faked. She checked the bolt, examined the scope, tested the trigger pull, all in under 30 seconds. This will work. I need match-grade ammunition, rangefinder, spotting scope, and weather instruments. Harris was already pulling the equipment. We've got M118LR match rounds. Federal primers. 190 grain Sierra Match King bullets. Perfect. Sarah's hands were steady now, all the trembling from earlier gone. This was muscle memory, trained reflexes taking over. I need 5 magazines, 20 rounds each, and a radio compatible with the Ranger frequency. Torres was on his phone, coordinating. I've got a Humvee ready at the motor pool. Drivers standing by. Sarah loaded the magazines with practiced efficiency, each round inspected and seated with care. Harris watched in amazement. "You've done this before." "Once or twice," Sarah said without looking up. She slung the rifle across her back and grabbed the rest of the gear. As she headed for the door, Harris called out, "Hey, what's your name?" "For the log?" Sarah paused at the threshold. "Raven 6. Then she was gone, moving through the base at a controlled run. Soldiers stopped to stare, the quiet supply worker, now armed and moving with deadly purpose. The Humvee was waiting, engine running. The driver, a young private, looked nervous. "Ma'am, where are we?" "Grid coordinate 342578. Sarah said, climbing into the passenger seat. "Elevation 2,310 meters. And drive fast, we're on the clock." The Humvee lurched forward, tires kicking up dust as they headed for the base exit. In the communications room, Torres stood next to Hendricks, both of them listening to Chen's increasingly desperate transmissions. "They're moving up. Coordinating fire teams. We can't hold this position much longer." Hendricks keyed his mic. "Viking 2-1, help is en route. Hold your position." "What help?" "Sir, there's nothing you can. Trust me, Viking. Help is coming. And she's going to change everything." The Humvee bounced over rough terrain, the driver pushing the vehicle to its limits. Sarah braced herself against the doorframe, her mind already running calculations. Distance to target, approximately 18 kilometers. Terrain, mountainous, unstable road surface. Time, critical. Through the radio clipped to her vest, she could hear the ongoing firefight. Bursts of automatic weapons fire, shouted commands. The distinctive crack of AK-47 seconds answered by the heavier thump of M4 carbines. "Viking 2-1. This is Raven 6. She kept her voice calm, professional. "I'm en route to Overwatch position. ETA, 15 minutes. Hold your position." There was a pause. Then Chen's voice, confused. "Raven 6? Who the hell is Raven 6? Your ticket home, Viking. Just stay alive for 15 more minutes." The Humvee crested a ridge, and Sarah could see the objective area in the distance. Smoke rising from the valley, where the Rangers were pinned down. And above it, the southern ridge, where muzzle flashes flickered like deadly fireflies. "There," she pointed. "That outcropping at 2 o'clock. Get me as close as you can." The driver nodded and adjusted course, the vehicle sliding slightly on loose gravel. Sarah's mind was already in operational mode, the same headspace she'd occupied on dozens of missions. The fear was there, it was always there, but it was background noise now. What mattered was the shot, the calculation, the mission. Jay's voice echoed in her memory. "Fear means you're still alive. SAR. Use it. Don't let it use you." They reached the base of the ridge, and Sarah was out of the Humvee before it fully stopped. She grabbed her gear and started climbing, boots finding purchase on the rocky slope. The driver called after her. "Ma'am, do you want me to come with you?" "Stay with the vehicle. If I'm not back in 2 hours, assume I'm compromised and return to base." She didn't wait for a response. The climb was steep, and her lungs burned. She'd spent too much time behind a desk, not enough time in the field. But her body remembered this too, how to move through hostile terrain, how to conserve energy while maintaining speed. 6 minutes to reach the top. She emerged onto a relatively flat area of rock and sparse vegetation. Perfect natural cover. She dropped to her stomach and sat up quickly, unfolding the bipod and settling the rifle into position. The valley spread out below her like a tactical map come to life. She could see the Ranger position, a cluster of vehicles and rock formations, where muzzle flashes showed they were still fighting. And beyond them, on the southern ridge, she could see the hostile positions. Too many of them. Sarah pulled out the rangefinder and started calculating. Distance to hostile positions, 1,147 meters. Wind, gusting from the northwest, approximately 12-15 miles per hour at her elevation. Probably 18-20 miles per hour in the valley. Temperature, dropping as the storm approached. Barometric pressure, falling. All of it mattered. At this range, every variable counted. She found the first target through her scope, a shooter on the hostile ridge, partially concealed behind rocks but exposing his upper body as he fired down into the valley. Viking 2-1. This is Raven 6. I'm in position. Engaging hostile overwatch in 10 seconds. Raven, we've got at least 30 contacts on that ridge. How many shooters do you have up there? Just one. Say again? You heard me, Viking. Now, get your heads down. Sarah settled into her shooting position, her body finding the old familiar angles. Left leg bent, right leg extended. Cheek welded to the stock. Right hand gripping. Left hand supporting. Breathing slow and controlled. Through the scope, the world narrowed to that one target. She could see his profile, now bearded, carrying an AK-47, wearing tactical gear that suggested he was more professional than average Taliban. The crosshairs settled center mass. She exhaled half a breath and held it. The world went silent. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar force. Through the scope, she watched the target drop. Hit, she whispered to herself. One down. She worked the bolt. The smooth action, ejecting the spent casing. The brass tumbled through the air, catching sunlight before hitting the rocks with a faint ping. Target 2. Another shooter, this one with an RPG, setting up to engage the ranger position. Range, 1,163 meters. Wind, steady from the left. Elevation adjustment, 3 clicks up. Breathe. Settle. Squeeze. The rifle spoke again. The RPG gunner collapsed, the weapon falling harmlessly to the ground. 2 down. In the valley, Chen's voice came through the radio, tight with controlled excitement. Raven 6, I don't know who you are, but those were incredible shots. Keep it up. Sarah was already acquiring her next target. And the next. Each shot a separate mathematical problem: distance, wind, elevation, target movement. Problems she'd solved hundreds of times before. 3, 4, 5. The hostile fighters on the ridge were starting to realize they were under fire from a precision shooter, but they couldn't identify her position. Some tried to take cover. Others fired blindly in various directions. Sarah picked them off methodically. No wasted shots. No hesitation. 6, 7, 8. But then, as she lined up her 9th shot, something changed. The sound of the rifle, the smell of gunpowder, the rhythm of breathing and firing. All of it triggered something deep in her mind. Suddenly she wasn't in Afghanistan anymore. She was in Helmand province, on a rooftop. And Jay was beside her, calling wind corrections. Winds shifting, Sar. 3 left. But Jay wasn't beside her. Jay was dead. The flashback hit like a physical blow. The rooftop in Helmand. The ambush they hadn't seen coming. Jay shoving her aside. The bullet that should have been Sarah's. Jay's blood on her hands. Jay's voice. Fading. Not your fault. Finish the mission. Sarah's hands started shaking. The crosshairs drifted off target. Her breathing became ragged. No, she whispered. Not now. Not here. But the memories wouldn't stop. Every shot she'd fired after Jay died. Every target she'd eliminated while her spotter's body lay cooling beside her. The mechanical efficiency of grief channeled into violence. Through the scope, the hostile fighters blurred. The valley spun. Raven 6, this is Viking 2-1. We need continuous suppression. They're regrouping. The urgency in Chen's voice cut through the flashback like a knife. Sarah blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. She had a job to do. Rangers were dying. Jay's voice in her memory, clearer now. You finish the mission, Sar. Always finish the mission. Sarah took a shuddering breath and steadied her hands through sheer force of will. She found the trigger again, felt its familiar resistance. I'm here, Jay, she whispered. I'm finishing it. Target 9. A machine gunner setting up to rake the ranger position. Range, 1,089 meters. Wind, gusting. Difficult shot. She waited for the gust to pass, then fired. The machine gunner fell. 9 down. Her hands were steadier now. The rhythm was coming back. Each shot a memorial. Each target eliminated a promise kept. 10, 11, 12. The hostile position on the ridge was in chaos. Fighters were scrambling for cover, their organized assault falling apart as their numbers dwindled. Raven 6. You're a goddamn miracle. Chen's voice was almost jubilant. They're breaking contact. They're pulling back. But Sarah wasn't done. Through her scope, she'd identified what looked like a commander, someone barking orders, trying to rally the scattered fighters. Range: 1,203 meters. Near the edge of her effective range. Strong crosswind. This would be a difficult shot. Maybe impossible. But she'd made impossible shots before. She calculated the wind drift, adjusted her aim to compensate for the distance and angle. The target was moving, gesturing to his men. She'd have to lead him. Time the shot perfectly. Jay's voice. I've got the wind. You've got the shot. Trust yourself. Sarah exhaled slowly. Let her heartbeat settle into the gap between breaths. The target paused for just a moment, standing still as he shouted commands. That was all she needed. The rifle cracked one more time. Through the scope, she watched the commander drop. 13 down. The remaining hostile fighters broke completely after that, abandoning their positions and fleeing down the backside of the ridge. The coordinated assault had turned into a rout. Viking 2-1, all hostile Overwatch positions neutralized. You're clear to move. Copy that. Raven 6. We're extracting now. I don't know how you did that, but you just saved 37 Rangers. Sarah lowered her rifle and sat back against the rocks. Her hands were shaking again, but from exhaustion this time, not trauma. She'd fired 13 rounds. 13 hits, 0 misses. Just like the old days. She looked down at the brass casings scattered around her position, the physical evidence of what she'd just done. Each one represented a life ended. She'd stopped counting her total years ago. Stopped trying to carry that weight. But these 13? These ones mattered. Because they'd saved 37 others. I finished it, Jay, she whispered to the empty air. Just like you asked. The radio crackled. Raven 6. This is Atlas Actual. Situation report? Sarah keyed her mic, her voice steady despite the emotional storm inside her. Atlas Actual. All threats neutralized. Rangers are mobile and extracting. Mission complete. Outstanding work, Raven 6. Return to base immediately. We'll debrief when you arrive. Copy that, sir. Raven 6 out. She began breaking down her equipment, packing everything with the same methodical care she'd used to set up. But as she worked, she noticed something on her forearm. Her sleeve had pulled up slightly, revealing the tattoo, the Raven in flight. The coordinates where Jay had died. Sarah traced the numbers with one finger, like she did every morning and every night. Still here, Jay. Still trying to do the right thing. The wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain. The storm was finally breaking. Sarah slung the rifle across her back and started down the slope toward the waiting Humvee. She'd picked up the rifle again. The thing she swore she'd never do. But 37 Rangers were alive because of it. And maybe, just maybe, that meant Jay's death hadn't been for nothing after all. The Humvee rumbled back toward forward operating base Atlas as the storm finally broke in earnest. Rain hammered the roof, turning the windshield into a blur, despite the wipers working at full speed. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, the rifle case secured between her knees, watching the desert transform into mud. She felt hollow. Empty in the way she always did after a firefight, the adrenaline crash, leaving her wrung out and exhausted. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but only because she was gripping the rifle case hard enough to make her knuckles white. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see the base perimeter lights in the distance. Ma'am? The driver's voice was tentative. What you did out there? That was incredible. I did my job. That wasn't just a job. That was. I've never seen anything like. Private. Sarah cut him off gently. I appreciate the sentiment. But right now, I'd really prefer silence. Yes, ma'am. "Sorry, ma'am." They drove the rest of the way without speaking. The base was a hive of activity when they arrived. Word had clearly spread. Soldiers stood in small groups, despite the rain, watching as the Humvee pulled through the gate. Sarah could see Torres in front of the operations center, along with Major Reeves and several other officers, and Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks, standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The Humvee stopped and Sarah stepped out into the rain. She was immediately struck by how quiet it was, dozens of people watching, but nobody saying a word. The only sound was the drumming of rain on metal roofs and the distant rumble of thunder. She walked toward the operations center, rifle case in hand. "Sergeant Vance." Hendricks' voice carried across the space. Not hostile, but not warm either. Carefully neutral. "Sir. The Rangers are 5 minutes out. Weather improved enough for extraction birds to fly. They're coming in hot." "Understood, sir. They've been asking about you. Apparently you made quite an impression." Sarah didn't respond. What could she say? She'd done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. The sound of rotor blades cut through the rain, 2 Blackhawks coming in low and fast. They flared over the landing zone, and before they'd even fully touched down, Rangers were jumping out. Some were helping wounded teammates. Others were scanning the perimeter with weapons ready, still in combat mode. Sergeant First Class Chen was the last one off, and his head was on a swivel, clearly looking for someone. His eyes found Sarah and he froze. She was still wearing her civilian contractor clothes, cargo pants, and a long-sleeve shirt, both now soaked with rain. She didn't look like a soldier, didn't look like a legend, but she was holding a rifle case that Chen recognized. He walked toward her slowly, his platoon falling in behind him. 37 Rangers, muddy and exhausted, forming up in the rain. One of them had his arm in a makeshift sling. Another had a bandage wrapped around his head. But they were all alive. Chen stopped 3 feet in front of Sarah. His eyes moved from her face to the rifle case and back again. "You're Raven 6, he said quietly. "Used to be. That was you on the ridge. 1 shooter. 13 targets. 13 hits." He shook his head slowly. "I've been a Ranger for 12 years. I've worked with some of the best shooters in the world. And I've never seen anything like that. You were in a bad position. Someone needed to fix it. Someone." Chen almost smiled. "The supply contractor. The woman we all walked past every day without giving a second thought." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. This was what she'd been dreading: the attention, the questions, the inevitable conversation about who she used to be. But Chen wasn't done. He came to attention, boots clicking together despite the mud, and rendered a salute that was parade ground perfect. "Staff Sergeant Vance, on behalf of 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 75th Ranger Regiment, thank you for saving our lives." One by one, the Rangers behind him snapped to attention and saluted in unison. 37 right hands raised in the rain. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. She hadn't been saluted in 2 years. Hadn't wanted to be. But standing here, looking at these men who were alive, because she'd remembered how to do what she was trained for. She returned the salute, holding it for the regulation 3 seconds. When she lowered her hand, Chen stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The shots you made today, some of them were over 1,200 meters. In gusting wind, at elevated targets with minimal exposure." He paused. "I checked the records when we landed. The longest confirmed kill by an Army sniper in Afghanistan was 1,367 meters, made by a soldier with the call sign Raven 6 in Helmand Province, 2021. That's not my record to claim anymore." "Like hell, it isn't." Chen's voice was firm. "You can take off the uniform, Sergeant. You can walk away from the job. But you can't walk away from who you are. Today proved that." Major Reeves stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Sergeant Vance, I took the liberty of accessing your service record. Or rather, trying to. It required about 6 levels of clearance I don't have." He turned the tablet to show her. The screen was mostly blacked out, redacted, classified markings everywhere. What I could read was impressive enough. 3 deployments. 147 confirmed kills in combat situations. Bronze Star with Valor. Silver Star. Purple Heart. He looked up. The rest is so classified, I'd need to be a general to read it. What the hell were you doing that required that level of secrecy? Sarah took a slow breath. Things that needed doing, sir. Things that don't need to be discussed. Fair enough. Reeves closed the tablet. But I think it's important for everyone here to understand exactly who was working in our supply depot for the past 3 months. He raised his voice so the growing crowd could hear. This is Staff Sergeant Sarah Vance, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Sniper qualified. JSOC operational experience. Call sign, Raven 6. She holds the record for longest confirmed kill by an Army sniper in Afghanistan. Today, she made 13 precision shots at extreme range under adverse conditions to save a trapped Ranger platoon. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Sarah could see the young Marines who joked about her that morning. They looked stunned, almost horrified at their earlier dismissal. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks stepped forward. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, he came to attention and saluted. Sergeant Vance, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. You tried to warn me this morning about the tactical situation. I dismissed your concerns because of assumptions I made. Poor assumptions. And because of those assumptions, I nearly got 37 Rangers killed. Sarah returned the salute. Sir, with respect, this isn't about apologies. It's about bringing soldiers home. That's all that matters. Maybe to you. But I put my pride ahead of sound tactical advice, and that's inexcusable. He lowered his hand. For what it's worth, I'll be recommending you for a commendation and requesting that your security clearance be reviewed for possible reactivation. We could use someone with your skills on a more permanent basis. I appreciate that, sir, but I left the military for good reasons. I understand. But the offer stands. He turned to Torres. Get her into dry clothes and make sure she has a hot meal. She's earned it. The crowd began to disperse slowly, soldiers heading back to their duties, but casting glances at Sarah as they went. She could feel the weight of their attention, their reassessment, their respect. It made her uncomfortable. Chen lingered, along with a few of his Rangers. Sergeant, can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Why'd you leave? With your skills, your record, you could have written your own ticket in the Army. Special operations, instructor positions, whatever you wanted. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down the rifle case and pulled up her sleeve, revealing the tattoo fully. The Raven. The coordinates. Corporal Jenna Martinez, she said softly. My spotter. Helmand Province, 2021. She saw a shooter I missed. Pushed me out of the way. Took the bullet meant for me. Chen's expression shifted to understanding. I'm sorry. I finished the mission. Eliminated the threat. Secured the position. Got us extracted. Did everything by the book. Sarah traced the coordinates with one finger. But I couldn't pick up the rifle after that. Every time I looked through a scope, all I could see was her. Every shot I took, I heard her voice calling corrections. That's survivor's guilt. It's normal. I know what it is, Sergeant. That's why I left. I couldn't be effective with that weight hanging over me. She lowered her sleeve. But today, when I heard your platoon was trapped, I heard her voice again. She always used to say, finish the mission. So I did. One of Chen's Rangers, a young specialist with a bandaged head, spoke up. Ma'am, for what it's worth, I'm really glad you did. I've got a wife and a baby girl back home. They get to see me again because of you. Sarah looked at him, and something in her chest loosened just slightly. What's your daughter's name? Emma. She's 8 months old. I've only met her once. Then you make damn sure you get home to her, specialist. Yes, ma'am. I will. The Rangers began filing away, heading toward the mess hall for food and showers. Chen was the last to leave, but he paused at the door. Sergeant Vance, Raven 6? Whatever you want to be called, thank you. Sincerely. You're welcome, Sergeant. Try not to walk into any more ambushes. He laughed, a sound of relief and exhaustion mixed together. We'll do our best. After they left, Sarah stood alone in the rain for a moment, looking down at the rifle case. She'd sworn never to pick it up again. But she had. And 37 people were alive because of it. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it didn't. But for the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than hollow. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd finally finished the mission Jay had asked her to complete. The one that started with, "Not your fault," and ended with, "Keep them safe." The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Sarah made it to the shower facilities. She stood under the hot water for a long time, watching mud and gunpowder residue swirl down the drain. Her muscles ached, not from injury, but from the tension of holding a precision shooting position for over 40 minutes. When she finally emerged, dressed in clean fatigues that Torres had left for her, she found the base had transformed. Word had spread like wildfire. The quiet supply contractor who nobody noticed was actually a legendary sniper with a classified record and a Medal of Honor-level reputation. She could feel eyes on her everywhere she walked. It made her skin crawl. Sarah headed toward the mess hall, hoping to grab something quick and retreat to her quarters. But when she stepped through the door, the entire room went silent. 50 soldiers, mid-meal, all turning to look at her. Then someone started clapping. It started with one of Chen's rangers, the specialist with the baby daughter. His hands came together in slow, deliberate applause. Then the soldier next to him joined. Then the next. Within seconds, the entire mess hall was on its feet, applauding. Sarah froze in the doorway, completely unprepared for this. She wasn't good with attention. Never had been. Even when she'd been active duty, she'd avoided award ceremonies and recognition events whenever possible. She held up a hand, trying to stop them. Please, But they weren't stopping. If anything, the applause grew louder. Staff Sergeant Torres appeared at her elbow, grinning. You might as well accept it, Vance. These soldiers know what you did. Let them show their appreciation. I just want to eat something and go to sleep. I know. But you've earned this moment, whether you want it or not. The applause finally died down and soldiers began returning to their meals, though many continued to glance her way. Sarah grabbed a tray and moved through the serving line, hyper-aware of every whisper, every pointed look. Heard she made shots from over a mile away. 13 targets, 13 hits. In high wind, classified service record. They say she worked with Delta. Call sign was Raven 6. The one from Helmand. Sarah found an empty table in the corner and sat with her back to the wall, old habits, hoping people would leave her alone. For about 2 minutes. They did. Then a young private approached nervously. Ma'am? I'm sorry to bother you, but could you sign this? He held out his notebook. Sarah blinked. Sign what? Just your name? And maybe your call sign? My brother's in Ranger School and he told me about Raven 6. He's not going to believe I actually met you. I'm not a celebrity private. I'm just someone who did a job. Yes, ma'am. But, please? Sarah sighed and signed the notebook, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Within minutes, there were 6 more soldiers waiting to ask for autographs, to shake her hand, to thank her for what she'd done. Sarah handled each interaction with as much grace as she could muster, but inside she was screaming for them to just leave her alone. Finally, Sergeant First Class Chen appeared and physically cleared the space around her table. All right, everyone back off. Raven's been through enough today without you all treating her like she's signing autographs at a football game. The crowd dispersed reluctantly. Chen sat down across from Sarah with his own tray. You look miserable, he observed. I hate attention. Yeah, I figured that out. He took a bite of something that might have been chicken. For what it's worth, it'll die down. Give it a few days, and they'll go back to treating you like just another person on base. Will they? Sarah pushed her food around her plate. Or will I just be that sniper from now on? Does it matter? You saved 37 lives today. That's not something people forget. I know. That's what scares me. Chen studied her for a moment. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to fuck off, if you want. Go ahead. Why does the recognition bother you so much? Most soldiers would kill for the reputation you have. Sarah set down her fork and looked at him directly. Because every time someone thanks me, every time someone tells me what an incredible shot I made, all I can think about is the shot I missed. The one that killed my spotter. My friend, you didn't miss that shot. Someone ambushed you. I should have seen him first. That was my job to see threats before they materialized. Jay saw him. And I didn't. And she died because of it. Sarah's voice remained level, but Chen could hear the pain underneath. So when people celebrate me, all I hear is, "You're great at keeping people alive, except the one who mattered most." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's survivor's guilt talking. And I get it, I really do. But you know what I think Corporal Martinez would say if she were here? What? She'd tell you to stop being an idiot and accept that you're exceptional at what you do. She'd tell you that saving 37 Rangers today was exactly what she pushed you out of the way for, so you could keep doing the job. Keep saving lives." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "You didn't know her." "No. But I know soldiers. And I know spotters don't take bullets for snipers they don't believe in absolutely." He stood up, grabbing his tray. "Think about it, Raven. Maybe the best way to honor her memory isn't to bury your skills in a supply depot. Maybe it's to use them." He walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her half-eaten meal. She sat there for a long time, watching soldiers come and go, hearing fragments of conversation about what had happened today. About her. Finally, she stood and headed for the door. As she passed a table of young Rangers, one of them, the private who'd made jokes that morning about the supply girl, stood up abruptly. "Ma'am, I need to apologize." Sarah stopped. "For what?" "This morning, I said some things. Stupid things. About how you didn't belong here. How my sister could probably bench press more than you." His face was red with embarrassment. "I was an asshole, and I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "What's your name, Private?" "Kowalski, ma'am." "Well, Private Kowalski, you weren't entirely wrong. Your sister probably can bench press more than me. I'm not very strong, physically." She paused. "But strength isn't just about muscles. Sometimes it's about knowing when to speak up, when to act, and when to do the job that nobody else can do. Remember that." "Yes, ma'am. I will." As Sarah walked out into the evening air, she heard Kowalski's friend whisper loudly, "Dude, you just got life advice from a literal legend." "I know," Kowalski whispered back. "I'm never going to judge anyone by appearances again." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. If nothing else good came from today, at least one young soldier had learned something valuable. The base was settling into evening routine. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of a truck convoy rolling out for night patrol. Generators hummed their endless song. The Hindu Kush mountains were barely visible in the fading light, their peaks lost in clouds. She walked toward her quarters, ready to collapse onto her cot and try to process everything that had happened. But as she rounded the corner of the supply depot, she found Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks waiting for her. "Sir," she said, coming to an informal position of attention. "At ease, Sergeant." Hendricks looked different than he had that morning. Less rigid, more thoughtful. "Can we talk? Off the record?" "Of course, sir." He gestured to a couple of supply crates stacked nearby, and they sat. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Hendricks said, "I've been in the Army for 23 years. I've commanded units in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. I thought I'd seen everything. Learned everything there was to know about warfare and leadership." He paused, then continued. "And then a civilian contractor I'd completely dismissed proved to me that I still had a lot to learn." "Sir, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm. "This morning, you tried to warn me about a tactical problem. And I dismissed you. Not because your analysis was wrong, it was spot on. But because you were a woman, a civilian, someone I'd categorized as not a combat person. And because of my prejudice, I nearly got good soldiers killed. But they didn't get killed, sir. That's what matters. Only because you were willing to step up when I wouldn't listen. Hendricks looked at her directly. I'm going to be honest with you, Sergeant. I've spent my career in units that were male-dominated. I grew up in a generation that didn't see women in combat roles. And some part of me, the part I'm not proud of, still carries those biases. Sarah remained silent, letting him talk. Today taught me something important. Competence doesn't have a gender. Excellence doesn't care what you look like or what assumptions people make about you. You are, without question, one of the finest soldiers I've ever encountered. And I'm ashamed that I couldn't see that until you proved it in a way I couldn't ignore. Sir, I appreciate the honesty, but I'm not interested in making you feel guilty. I just want to do my job and be left alone. I understand. But I have a question for you. Hendricks leaned forward. What if your job wasn't supply logistics? What if it was doing what you did today? Providing precision fire support. Saving lives. Using the skills you clearly haven't lost. I left that life, sir. I know. And I read your service record, the parts that aren't classified. Anyway, I know about Corporal Martinez. I know why you left. He paused. But I also know that today, when it mattered, you picked up that rifle again. And you were magnificent. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. One mission doesn't mean I'm ready to come back. Maybe not. But it means you're capable of coming back. And it means there are soldiers out there who would be alive tomorrow because of your skills, but who might die without them. That's not fair, sir. No, it's not. But it's true. Hendricks stood. I'm not going to pressure you, Sergeant. This has to be your choice. But I want you to know that if you decide to return to active duty, I will personally ensure you have whatever support, whatever resources, whatever position you need, no questions asked. No bureaucratic bullshit. He started to walk away, then turned back. One more thing. I submitted the paperwork for a commendation this evening. What you did today deserves recognition, whether you want it or not. But I also submitted something else. A formal apology for my conduct in this morning's briefing. It'll go in my permanent record, because you deserve that too. Sarah stood as well. Sir, I don't want you to damage your career because it's not about what you want, Sergeant. It's about what's right. I made a mistake based on prejudice, and I'm owning it. That's what leaders do. He rendered a salute. Thank you for your service, Raven 6. Both the service you gave before and the service you gave today. Sarah returned the salute, and Hendricks walked away into the gathering darkness. She stood there for a long time, watching the base settle into night, thinking about what he'd said, about choices and capabilities and the weight of skills that could save lives. From her pocket, her hand found her phone. She scrolled through old photos. She rarely looked at pictures from her time with the 75th Rangers. There was one of her and Jay, both of them in full gear, grinning at the camera after a successful mission. Jay's voice in her memory. You finished the mission, Sar. Always finish the mission. Maybe the mission wasn't done yet. Maybe it was just beginning. The next morning came too early. Sarah had barely slept, her mind churning through everything that had happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the valley, the ridge, the targets falling one by one. But she also saw Jay, smiling, alive in her memory in a way that felt less painful than it had in months. At 0630 hours, there was a knock on her door. Come in, she called, already dressed. Major Reeves entered, holding a tablet and looking somewhat apologetic. Morning, Sergeant. Sorry to interrupt your rest, but there's been a development. What kind of development? The kind where half the base wants to meet you, and the other half wants to recruit you for various assignments. He pulled up something on the tablet. I've got requests here from 3 different battalion commanders, Special Operations Command, and even the base chaplain. who apparently wants to talk to you about spiritual resilience under pressure." Sarah groaned. "This is exactly what I didn't want." "I know. Which is why I've been running interference all morning. But there's one meeting you can't avoid." He paused. "The commanding general of Regional Command East heard about yesterday's operation. He's flying in this afternoon specifically to meet you." "A general? Great." "Sarah. He's bringing a Medal of Honor with him. Apparently, your actions yesterday qualify for immediate consideration." "No." Sarah's response was instant and firm. "Absolutely not." Reeves blinked. "I'm sorry? I don't want a medal. I don't want recognition. I did what needed to be done, and that's it. Tell the general thank you, but no. I don't think you can actually turn down a Medal of Honor. Watch me." Sarah stood, her expression set. "I mean it, Major. If the general wants to fly here and shake my hand, fine. But I'm not accepting a medal for doing my job, especially not when Corporal Martinez never got the recognition she deserved for saving my life." Reeves was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll convey your feelings to the general's staff. Though I should warn you, he's not the type to take no for an answer easily. Then he and I will have an interesting conversation." After Reeves left, Sarah made her way to the mess hall for breakfast. The reaction was the same as last night, heads turning, whispers, a few soldiers coming up to thank her. She handled it with as much grace as she could manage, but it was exhausting. She was halfway through her eggs when Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks approached her table. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 3 other officers she didn't recognize, all looking at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something like reverence. "Sergeant Vance, do you have a few minutes?" Hendricks asked. "Of course, sir." He gestured to the other officers. "This is Colonel Patterson from 2nd Brigade. Lieutenant Colonel Williams from Special Operations Task Force East, and Major Chen, no relation to Sergeant Chen, from Intelligence." They all nodded greeting. Sarah stood and shook hands with each of them, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. Colonel Patterson spoke first. "Sergeant Vance, I'll get straight to the point. Your actions yesterday were extraordinary. The kind of precision shooting we rarely see even from our most elite units. I'd like to discuss the possibility of you joining 2nd Brigade in an advisory capacity." Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Colonel Williams cut in. "With respect, Colonel, SOTFE has priority on specialized personnel. Sergeant Vance's skills would be better utilized in direct action operations." "Gentlemen," Major Chen interjected, "before we start arguing over recruitment, I think we should consider what Sergeant Vance actually wants." All 3 officers turned to look at her expectantly. Sarah took a slow breath. "With respect to all of you, I'm not interested in rejoining active combat operations. I left the military for personal reasons that haven't changed." "But you picked up a rifle yesterday," Patterson pointed out, "because Rangers were dying and there was no other option. That was a one-time situation, was it?" Williams leaned forward. "Or was it you remembering who you really are?" "Sergeant, I've read what little I could access of your service record. You're not just good at this, you're exceptional. Generational talent. The Army needs people like you. The Army has plenty of talented snipers." "Not like you," Chen said quietly. "I checked the numbers. Yesterday you made 13 shots at ranges between 1,089 and 1,203 meters. In gusting wind. At targets with limited exposure. Your accuracy rate was 100%. Do you know how rare that is? I was well trained. Training doesn't account for what you did. That was talent, experience, and something that can't be taught." Chen pulled out a file folder. "I also found something interesting in the historical records. In 2021, a sniper with the call sign Raven 6 made 47 confirmed kills in a single 18-hour engagement, held a defensive position alone against overwhelming odds. Military historians have compared it to Audie Murphy's Medal of Honor action." Sarah's jaw tightened. "That was a different life." "It was 2 years ago," Williams said. "That's not different life territory. That's temporary hiatus territory, gentlemen." Hendrick's voice cut through the recruitment pitches. "I think we're overwhelming Sergeant Vance. Why don't we give her some space to consider?" "No need to consider," Sarah interrupted. "My answer is no. To all of you. I appreciate the offers, but I'm not interested." Colonel Patterson frowned. "Sergeant, I don't think you understand the gravity." "Sir, with all due respect, I understand perfectly." Sarah's voice was level but firm. "You see someone who can make difficult shots, and you want to use that skill. I understand, but I'm not a weapon you can deploy whenever it's convenient. I'm a person who made a choice to leave combat operations because the cost was too high. But yesterday you proved you still have the capability." "Capability isn't the issue." Sarah's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. She took a breath and continued more quietly. "The issue is that every time I look through a scope, I see my spotter's face. Every time I pull a trigger, I hear her last words. Yesterday I did what I had to do because Rangers were dying. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to make it my life again." The officers exchanged glances. Finally, Williams spoke. "I understand, Sergeant, and I apologize for pushing. But the offer remains open if you change your mind." They left, and Sarah sat back down, her breakfast now cold. Hendricks lingered. "That couldn't have been easy," he said. "It wasn't. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Coming back has to be your decision, made for the right reasons, not because people pressure you into it." Sarah looked up at him. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you being so supportive? Yesterday morning, you couldn't stand having me in the briefing room. Now you're defending my choices to senior officers." Hendricks sat down across from her. "Because yesterday you taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. You taught me that my assumptions about people, about who can do what, about who deserves respect, were limiting my effectiveness as a leader." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent my whole career believing that the best warriors were people who looked and acted a certain way. People like me, and when someone didn't fit that mold, I dismissed them. But you shattered that assumption. You proved that excellence comes in forms I wasn't expecting and wasn't willing to see. Sir, I didn't do it to teach you a lesson, I know. But I learned one anyway." He stood, "And from now on, when someone tries to tell me what a soldier should look like, or what a warrior should be, I'm going to think of the supply contractor who saved 37 Rangers, with 13 perfect shots." He left, and Sarah was finally alone with her thoughts. Around her, the mess hall continued its morning routine. Soldiers eating, talking, preparing for another day. But Sarah noticed something different now. When people looked at her, it wasn't just curiosity or hero worship, it was respect. Real respect. The kind that acknowledged not just what she'd done, but who she was. And maybe, she thought, that was worth something after all. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a place she never expected to be, back in the armory, standing in front of the rifle case that held the M2010. Sergeant Harris, the armorer, watched her carefully. "You here to turn it in, or check it out again?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. She opened the case and looked at the rifle. In the past 3 days, she'd had dozens of conversations with Chen and his Rangers, who'd invited her to their unit memorial ceremony and treated her like family. With Torres, who'd quietly mentioned that the supply depot would miss her competence but understood if she had other plans. With Major Reeves, who'd given her a realistic assessment of what returning to active duty would mean. And she'd had countless conversations with herself, late at night in her quarters, staring at the tattoo on her arm and trying to figure out what Jay would want her to do. "You know," Harris said, breaking the silence, "that rifle's been sitting in here for 18 months, never been fired except for your mission 3 days ago. Seems like a waste, if you ask me." "Weapons aren't meant to sit idle," Sarah agreed. "Neither are people with your skills." Sarah ran her hand along the rifle's stock, feeling the familiar weight and balance. "Can I ask you something, Harris? Do you ever regret joining the army?" He thought about it. "Sometimes. When things are bad, when friends get hurt, when the mission goes wrong. But then I remember why I signed up to be part of something bigger than myself, to use my skills to keep people safe. He paused. I'm guessing you're asking yourself similar questions right now. Every day. What's holding you back? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Fear. Fear that if I come back, I'll lose myself again, that I'll become just a weapon, just a tool for killing, and I'll forget that there's supposed to be a person underneath. And yesterday, 3 days ago, did you feel like just a weapon? Sarah thought back to the ridge, to the shots, to Chen's voice on the radio, desperate and afraid, to the moment when she decided to pick up the rifle despite her fears. No, she said slowly. I felt like someone who was finally doing what they were meant to do. Harris nodded. Sounds like you have your answer then. Before Sarah could respond, the armory door opened and Major Reeves walked in, followed by someone she didn't expect. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing army dress uniform with more ribbons than Sarah could count quickly, and stars on her shoulders. Brigadier General Elizabeth Cortez. If Sarah was reading the rank correctly, Sarah snapped to attention immediately. Ma'am? At ease, Sergeant Vance. The general's voice was warm but carried unmistakable authority. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've been trying to track you down for 3 days. You're a hard woman to pin down. I've been processing some things, ma'am. I can imagine. Major Reeves tells me you've been dodging recruitment offers left and right. Not dodging, ma'am. Just declining politely. General Cortez smiled slightly. I like that. Polite but firm. That's a rare quality. She gestured to the rifle in the case. That's a beautiful weapon. I understand you put it to good use. I did what needed to be done, ma'am. More than that. You saved 37 lives, with skills most snipers couldn't match in their best day. The general walked closer. I'm not here to recruit you, Sergeant, or to pressure you. I'm here because I wanted to meet the soldier who turned down a Medal of Honor recommendation. Sarah blinked. Ma'am, I'm the general who was supposed to fly in and present it to you. But Major Reeves passed along your message that you wouldn't accept it. That took courage, turning down the military's highest honor. It didn't feel right, ma'am. I was doing my job, and there are others who deserved recognition more. You mean Corporal Martinez? Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, ma'am. General Cortez pulled out a folder from under her arm. I took the liberty of reviewing Corporal Martinez's service record. You're right, she never received the recognition she deserved. So I've submitted paperwork to award her the Silver Star posthumously for her actions in Helmand Province. Her family will receive it at a ceremony next month. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, ma'am. That means everything. It's long overdue. But here's the thing. Sergeant Vance honoring the dead is important. But so is making sure the living fulfill their potential. The general opened the folder. I've reviewed your entire service record. The classified parts too. I know about the JSOC operations. The missions that never made it into official reports. The impossible shots and the lives saved. She closed the folder. You're 29 years old. You have decades of service left in you. If you want it, but more importantly, you have skills that could save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives over the course of a career. So, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Yes, ma'am. 3 days ago, when you picked up that rifle and made those shots, did you feel like you were betraying Corporal Martinez's memory, or honoring it? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been asking herself the same thing for 3 days, but hearing it stated so directly forced her to confront the answer she'd been avoiding. Honoring it, she whispered. She pushed me out of the way so I could keep doing the job, keep saving lives. And that's what I did. Exactly. General Cortez's voice was gentle but firm. So here's what I'm offering, and it's a one-time offer. Non-negotiable terms. If you decide to return to active duty, I will personally ensure you're assigned to a unit where you can use your skills appropriately. No bureaucratic nonsense. No political games. You'll work with people who respect what you bring to the table, and you'll have full access to mental health support, trauma counseling, whatever you need to deal with your survivor's guilt in a healthy way. She paused. But I'm not going to pressure you. This has to be your choice, made for your reasons. If you decide to stay in supply logistics, I'll respect that. But I wanted you to know that the door is open if you want to walk through it. Sarah looked at the rifle, then at the tattoo on her arm, then at General Cortez. Ma'am, can I have some time to think about it? Take all the time you need, Sergeant. But don't take too long. The Army's patience with good talent is limited. The general smiled. And Sarah, whatever you decide, thank you for your service, both the service you've already given and the service you gave 3 days ago. After the general left, Sarah stood alone in the armory with Harris and the rifle. So, Harris said, what are you going to do? Sarah closed the rifle case slowly. I'm going to finish what I started. Which means, I'm going to stop hiding from who I am. I'm going to honor Jay's memory the right way, by being the soldier she believed in, the one she saved. Sarah picked up the case. Can I check this out for an extended period? Harris grinned. For you, Raven 6, you can keep it as long as you need. 2 weeks later, the armory was busy with the afternoon shift when Sarah walked in for the last time as a civilian contractor. She was wearing ACU fatigues again, this time with rank insignia restored. Staff sergeant stripes on her chest, Ranger tab on her shoulder, and a new patch she hadn't worn before. Special Operations Command. Harris looked up and immediately stood. Well, look at you. Back in uniform. Feels strange. Sarah admitted. Like putting on an old coat that doesn't quite fit the same way. Give it time. It'll fit again. He gestured to the back room. I've got something for you. He led her to a secured locker and opened it. Inside was a rifle case. Not the standard M2010, but something custom. General Cortez had this sent over. Said it was specifically built for you. Sarah opened the case and her breath caught. It was a custom M2010, but with modifications she'd only dreamed about. Enhanced scope, adjustable stock, modified trigger, improved muzzle brake. Every detail was perfect, and engraved on the stock, in small letters, for Raven 6. Finish the mission. There's a note, Harris said, handing her a small card. Sarah read it aloud. Sergeant Vance, every warrior needs the right tools. This rifle was built specifically for your specifications by the best gunsmiths in the Army. Use it to keep our people safe. Use it to honor the ones we've lost. And use it to remind yourself that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. B.G. E. Cortez. Sarah ran her hand along the stock, feeling the engraving. She didn't have to do this. That's what makes it mean something. Over the next hour, Sarah packed up her belongings from the supply depot. Torres stopped by to help, along with Chen and several of his rangers. So you're really doing this, Torres said, taping up a box. Going back to the fight. I am. General Cortez assigned me to a special operations task force that operates throughout Regional Command East. I'll be providing precision fire support for high-value target operations. That's dangerous work. It's what I do best. Chen carried a box out to the waiting vehicle. When he came back, he said, my platoon ships out next month. New area of operations, high-risk environment. Any chance you'll be providing overwatch for us? Sarah smiled slightly. Can't discuss future operations, Sergeant. Classified. Right, of course, he grinned. But if a certain sniper happened to be watching our backs from an elevated position, we wouldn't complain. As Sarah loaded the last of her gear, she noticed a crowd had gathered dozens of soldiers from across the base, coming to see her off. Not just to say goodbye, but to show respect. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks emerged from the operations center and walked over. Without preamble, he came to attention and saluted. Staff Sergeant Vance, it has been an honor having you on this base. You've taught us all valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and what true excellence looks like. He lowered his hand. Give them hell out there, Raven. I'll do my best, sir. One by one, soldiers came forward to shake her hand or offer quiet words of thanks. The specialist with the baby daughter, Private Kowalski, who'd learned not to judge by appearances. Even the young soldiers who'd joked about her that first morning, now looking at her with genuine respect. Finally, Chen stepped forward one last time. "Sergeant Vance, on behalf of 2nd Platoon, I just want to say we wouldn't be here without you. You saved our lives, and we won't forget it. Just make sure you stay alive to remember it, Sergeant." "Yes, ma'am. We'll do our best." Sarah climbed into the vehicle and looked back at Forward Operating Base Atlas one final time. The place where she'd tried to hide from who she was. The place where she'd been forced to remember. As the vehicle pulled away, she touched the tattoo on her arm, the coordinates where Jay had died. "I'm finishing it, Jay," she whispered. "Just like you asked." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome back to the fight, Raven 6. Your first mission briefing is tomorrow at 0800. They're waiting for you. General Cortez." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Fear was still there, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of becoming nothing more than a weapon. But it was balanced now by something stronger: purpose. She was Raven 6. Elite sniper, protector of rangers, keeper of promises. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, the mission reports were classified. But the statistics weren't. 47 precision fire support missions completed. 183 confirmed eliminations of high-value targets. 0 friendly casualties during operations. Under Raven 6 Overwatch, 12 different units provided support, including Rangers, SEALs, and Delta operators. 89% mission success rate, compared to 67% average for similar operations. But those were just numbers. What mattered more were the letters Sarah received. "Dear Sergeant Vance, you saved my son's life during an operation in Kunar Province. He came home because you were watching over his team. Thank you. Doesn't seem like enough, but thank you." The Martinez family. The name hit Sarah like a punch. Martinez. Same last name as Jay. She wrote back immediately, explaining who Jay had been to her, what she'd meant, how every mission was a way of honoring her memory. The family wrote back with photos of Jay, ones Sarah had never seen. Jay with her family, Jay in high school, Jay at basic training. They told her stories Sarah had never heard. And slowly, over months of correspondence, something inside Sarah began to heal. Not completely, that kind of wound never fully closed, but enough that she could look at Jay's memory and feel gratitude instead of just guilt. In the armory at her new base, Sarah kept a small photo taped inside her rifle case. It showed 2 soldiers, her and Jay, both grinning at the camera, both alive, both ready for whatever came next. And every time Sarah picked up that rifle, every time she settled into a shooting position to protect soldiers who were counting on her, she heard Jay's voice one more time. "You finish the mission, Sar. Always finish the mission." So that's what she did. One shot at a time. One life saved at a time. One promise kept at a time. Staff Sergeant Sarah Vance, Raven 6, had found her way home. Not to a place, not to a building, or a base or a piece of geography, but to herself. And that was the only home that really mattered. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?